Hello and welcome to the Crystal Palace podcast. I'm Alfonso Greenbrook, and in today's podcast I'll be looking over the game against Doncaster Rovers by bringing you my match review, player rankings and my man of the match. As well as this, I'm also going to bring you an interview with Roy Hodgson after the game. So let's begin. Crystal Palace eased past League One side Doncaster Rovers to ensure their progression to the Emirates FA Cup quarter-finals. The knockout tie was won with 2 goals at either end of the first half, with Schlupp and Max Meyer combining to give the Eagles their deserved victory. To start, playing under the shade from the beating Yorkshire sun, the day's opening exchanges were as tepid as the weather until, as the match neared the end of its first 10 minutes, the Eagles' Schlupp emphatically sparked things into life. Picking up the ball in his own half, the Palace midfielder drove with purpose towards the Rovers' back line and, looking up, fired across the box beyond the outstretched arms of the keeper to open a London side's account. However, despite having grasped an early lead, Palace were adeptly kept on the back foot as the home side pressed high and with pace to earn themselves a succession of ultimately unsuccessful corners. The Eagles attempted to lash back at Doncaster's spell of pressure when Jordan Ayew picked up the ball in the box, turned and did well to send a strike at goal. Shot stop on Morrison, however, was in place to hold his venomous effort. At the other end of the pitch, the Rovers refused to change their tactical approach, and Alfie May launched a shot at the visitors' goal which sailed to safety over Wayne Hennessey's bar. Later, following Meyer's deflected effort, Palace came closer to scoring from a 27th minute corner as Scott Dann put power behind a header only to see it glance out of touch, contentiously stroking the arm of Danny Andrew as it did. For the second time in 5 minutes, Palace were left frustrated to see nothing awarded from referee Mike Dean when a ball from a Palace defender, this time Patrick Fernando, struck the arm of a Doncaster defender, this time Paul Downing, in the Rovers' box. Shortly after though, Palace weren't to need refereeing decisions to double their advantage when, seconds before Dean blew his whistle to conclude the first half's 1 added minute, the Eagles doubled their lead through Meyer who, facing an unguarded half of the goal, headed home to extend his side's advantage from a looping Andros Townsend header across the box. Opening the second half, it was Doncaster who were the first to threaten when Benjamin Whiteman launched a shot at goal which, swerving, was beaten away by Hennessey before March headed over from the following corner, much to the relief of Palace's 3,000 travelling fans. Building on their momentum, Doncaster again forced South London's best to be held when club veteran James Coppinger rifled a shot which deflected off Martin Kelly and just over Hennessey's bar. Ali Crawford similarly went for a heroic opener to the Rovers' account, however his strike was widely high. The squandered chances weren't to discontinue, as a mass of bodies in the Palace box all looked on, as on loan Herbie Kane sent a header over the Eagles' woodwork, but it was Doncaster who were then in the ascendancy. Switching to a 4-man midfield with the arrival of Choku Kouyaté, Palace looked to solidify and terminate Doncaster's bout of pressure and, with the vocal support of Croydon's travelling faithful, the approach seemed to work. Michy Batshuayi came tantalisingly close to adding a third to the afternoon's total when, running head-on into the box, his touch was too heavy and, almost one-on-one with Morossi, the Rovers keeper was able to smother the ball to safety. Seconds later, Meyer cleverly brought down a loose ball from Batshuayi's cleared header, however the drilled resulting effort was sent out of play. With just over 10 minutes left to work his side's way back into the game, John Marcus angled an effort at Hennessey's near post, but the 32-year-old shot-stopper was equal to it and stood firmly behind the ball. Unable to pull off a late comeback and bereft following their nullified second-half surge, Doncaster were beaten at the final whistle and, at their expense, Crystal Palace pulled themselves just 1 game away from Wembley. So I'm now going to move on to my player ratings, but before I start, don't forget you can follow us on both Twitter and Facebook at Crystal Palace for all latest Palace news. So if you are someone like myself who does like to follow a vast array of Palace accounts on both Twitter and Facebook, then of course do head over to the respective sites and of course follow our Twitter and Facebook account at Crystal Palace. Now of course alongside just general news about the club, we do during the transfer windows, especially during the January transfer window just gone. We do regularly update it with the latest transfer news, so we're very good at sourcing news articles, posting them out there as quick as possible. So if you are someone who wants to follow another account to get all the latest Palace news, especially transfer news during the transfer windows, of course feel free to follow us for that. And alongside that, and alongside just general news about Palace, we obviously find interviews with on there, whether that be with players, whether that be with management, anything about the club which we may think you may have missed, we obviously post that on there as well. And obviously that's alongside, once again, alongside general club news, whether that be about the new stand, the academy, the ladies team, whatever it is about the club, we of course post it on there as well. So if you want a place to get general news, transfer news, as well as interviews, then of course that's a great place to follow. And if you are someone on Twitter especially who wants to have a different opinion of a game, for example, obviously I give you my opinion in the podcast, but alongside that there is a guy who runs the page on Twitter, and of course if you do want his opinion before and after the game, obviously before the game giving his opinion on the lineup, and of course after the game just giving you sort of a short summary of the game as well. So if you do want another place alongside the podcast just to get our opinion as a page, then of course follow us on our Twitter page. Now another great place to share opinions is in the YouTube comments, so if you are listening to the podcast on YouTube, then do feel free to drop a comment below the video with your player ratings, where you rate the players' performances from 1 to 10, with of course 10 being the best. Now one of the reasons I want you to do that is that yes, I've got my general view of the game, and obviously I've rated all of the players individually, but rather than me just having that opinion, I want you guys to comment below so I can read through it and basically compare how we thought the players performed. So I'm sure there's going to be a few players here which we might have differing opinions on, so of course feel free just to comment below with your player ratings so that I can come back and obviously read it and compare it to mine. And even if you don't want to do that, or even if you're a Doncaster fan who finds himself on the podcast, do comment below with your general views of the game, because even though, for example, a Doncaster fan's perspective, yes, they lost the game, but they put in a very good performance, and don't really think they can feel hard done by, because we, at the end of the day, we scored the 2 goals, we showed a little bit more quality, but that's not to say Doncaster weren't good, because certainly, or if we didn't score them 2 goals, then maybe it would have been a different game. So it just goes to show how games can turn out. But in the end, we showed our quality. But nevertheless, got to give a bit of credit to Doncaster. They had more shots than us, I think, more shots on target. And generally, they were just trying to play their normal game that they play in the league. In terms of their very attacking football. So the fact that they stuck to that, and they only came away with a 2-0 loss. The fact that they still put a good shift about themselves is of course what you've got to give them credit for. And of course from a Palace perspective, comment below what you think about the game itself, who you thought impressed, who you think was a little bit disappointing. And obviously they've done the draw already. We've got Watford away in the quarterfinals of the Cup, so of course feel free to comment below as well with your opinions on that draw. But like I've said already, main reason for you to get involved and comment in the YouTube comment section is just so that I can obviously read your opinion, but also any other fans who come to the podcast, rather than them just listening to me. They can of course read the comment section or leave comments in the comment section so that they can obviously have discussion between other fans. So if you are someone looking to get involved, or even if you've got a question for me, then of course feel free to do that in the YouTube comments. Now if you do want to follow any of the social media pages or join our Facebook group, then do check all the links that will be in the description below. But I'm just going to do a little disclaimer like I do for every FA Cup or every Carabao Cup game. Obviously, as always, I'm only going to give a small sort of summary of each player's performances and just a little summary of the game at the end as well. And that's just because, obviously, because we're quite far in the Cup now, a lot more people are interested. But certainly in the early rounds of the Cup against lower league opposition, especially against Grimsby, for example, where not many people are interested in that. Because not many people are interested in the Cup, because of course the league is a priority, and certainly that seems to be the theme of Roy Hodgson, who wants, obviously the Cup's great, but he wants to concentrate on the league. Nevertheless, I'm just going to go through each player individually, give them a rating like I normally do, but rather than going into too much detail, because I know not everyone wants it to drag out, because it was a lower league opposition and because it's the FA Cup as opposed to the league. So I'm just going to give you a smaller summary of the players' performances, just to give you an idea of how that second string side did, but also give you an idea of some of the players who are normally in the first team, whether they sort of come up to that standard. And certainly, even though it was lower league opposition, like I said already, I do think Doncaster put a very good account of themselves out. And yes, it was our second string side, but the fact that they gave them a very fair test, but we were able to overcome that and score the 2 goals as we did, was of course a positive as well. And I do think, looking at the game as a whole, people would go, 2-0 for a Premier League side. That's fine, you would expect that against low league opposition. But actually, it was a good performance from both sides. And actually, from a neutral perspective, let's say if I was watching that game, I'd say it was a great game of football, because you had chances at both ends of the pitch, and in the end it was the quality that showed through. So overall, Really good game of football, good performances from both sides, and obviously quite happy that Palace have got through to the next round, and of course we're going to have Watford away in the quarter-finals. Now I'm going to move on now to the player ratings, and I'm going to start and go with Wayne Hennessey. Going to give him a 6 overall because I do think that's a fair reflection of his performance. Now in terms of the first half, there was a few nervy moments where, you know, he took his eye off the ball and ended up making a mess of a clearance, and I think there was one in particular where he got a ball back and he's tried to control it and it's gone out for a Doncaster corner. So there are a few nervy moments from Hennessey in that first half in particular. You know, a few of the times when Doncaster were looking to get the ball forward, he obviously took his eye off the ball. And of course that clearance was absolutely horrendous. I don't know what he was trying to do, whether he was trying to chest the ball or knee the ball, whatever he was trying to do, he made a terrible mess of it and he obviously went out for a corner. But obviously I've given him a 6 because in the second half he was much better. You know, not great because he was rarely tested because we contained Doncaster, but in terms of making routine stops, he done exactly that. You know, there was one effort from Kane in particular who I was quite impressed with in a Doncaster's perspective. Obviously you would expect Hennessey to make that save, but nevertheless a routine save he made. And Whiteman also had an effort which of course it was sort of swerving in the air, looking like it could go anywhere. So the fact that Hennessey, albeit he sort of, rather than catching it because the way it was moving, he sort of parried it out. Yes, he probably should have parried it to the side as opposed to straight ahead of him, but luckily we were able to clear it and stop the striker getting the end of it. But nevertheless, the fact that he was able to push away Whiteman's effort, which of course with the wind and with the way the ball was moving was quite a difficult one to deal with, so the fact that he dealt with that was of course good to see. But like I've said already, aside from them two efforts that he made saves for from Kane and Whiteman after the break, especially, well, I suppose it's sort of the end of that first half and going into the second half, he didn't really have anything to do, because mainly we were able just to contain Doncaster, and even when Doncaster did get through, he was obviously able to deal with everything fairly confidently. So I do think overall a 6 is a fair result. And personally for me, obviously there's going to be a lot of debate. I think now we've got a Premier League club again in the next round in Watford, and because, you know, if we win our next few games in the league, there's going to be a lot less pressure on us. So if that is the case, obviously Hennessey done alright in this game, but I want Guaita to come into this the game against Watford in the next round, only because Hennessey looked a bit shaky and a bit nervous at parts of this game, put me a bit worried. And if we do truly want to get to the semi-final, to the final, we've got to start playing Guaita from, you know, the next few rounds, because of course you want to play your best team to get through in the cup. So of course I'll leave that for you guys to debate, but personally for me, Hennessey didn't do anything terrible in this game, but going forward in the next few rounds, if we really want to get to Wembley, then of course we need to consider playing Guaita. So I'm going to move on now to the defence, obviously starting with the right back Joe Ward. Going to give him a 6 overall because, like he's done in the FA Cup this season, he's come into the side, put in a good shift, and obviously against Tottenham he was excellent, but in other games like the Grimsby game, he wasn't necessarily the best defender on the pitch, but he done a shift for the side, and that's what you would expect. Now, much like Hennessey, there was a moment in the game where he put us under unnecessary pressure, and that's obviously just 7 minutes into the game. He's made a very poor back pass, and luckily for us, it didn't lead to anything. But on another day, if that was in the Premier League, for example, maybe the opposition would have punished us from that. So maybe that's something to consider with Ward. Maybe it's because he hasn't been playing much this season, but whatever it was, you know, really putting us under unnecessary pressure on that occasion by making that weak back pass. And in terms of the player he was coming up against, you know, James Coppenden, he's obviously a Doncaster legend, I think, because he's been there 15 years. And of course I suppose he proved a decent threat for Joe Ward, and the fact that down that flank, I think Ward got the better of him and certainly defended relatively well against him, that was of course good to see. And in terms of that battle, obviously at the start it looked like he was going to be tested quite a lot and it was going to be a long day, but the fact that Ward slowly got into the game and eventually won that battle by just containing James Coppender was of course good to see. And when you consider he was one of the players who went off for Doncaster, just shows how well Ward did, albeit at the beginning he was a bit shaky. And like I said already, you know, obviously the Tottenham game was good, but in terms of the Grimsby game before that, he wasn't the greatest, he was pretty average. So it was actually nice to see him come into the side and put in a better performance than he has done in the recent rounds. So I do think overall a 6 is a fair result. So moving on now to our first centre-back, and that is Martin Kelly. Going to give him a 7 overall because Mr. Reliable once again put in a very good performance. And yes, in the second half especially, we wasn't really tested that much by Doncaster, but nevertheless in that first half in particular, I think Kelly done a fantastic job to contain their threat. Now obviously in terms of the game we played last weekend against West Ham, obviously Kelly came into that side because James Tompkins was injured, so he was one of the first players on our shortlist in our starting 11 who actually played the last game. So in terms of comparing him to other players, he's going to be the one who, obviously there was a week between the games, but he was the one who you would expect to be a little bit more fatigued than the others, mainly because he played the week before. But that didn't really seem to affect his performance, and he didn't look like he was a player who, you know, had played a game of, you know, a week before, in comparison to his teammates in the starting 11, who obviously hadn't played since the last round, so since sort of January time. But nevertheless, he just slotted into that side and basically carried on from where he did against West Ham, you know, putting a very solid performance. And obviously, when we had James Tomkins on the bench, it showed that obviously Tomkins was getting back into the team, but of course Hodgson wanted to stick with Martin Kelly. And rightly so, because he'd done a really good job. And to be honest, you've got to give Martin Kelly credit, because even though Doncaster had more shots than us, I think Kelly, on the whole, defended really well. A very solid display from him, and essentially just dealt with everything that was thrown at him. So there isn't anything in particular to pick out about his performance, other than the fact that in comparison to his teammates on the day, he obviously was the one who's most recently played a game, in the fact that he played the week before, whereas other players like Scott Dann hadn't played since January. But that didn't really seem to affect his performance, and certainly when you consider the other players in the team had a little bit more rest, didn't really seem to affect his overall performance. So like I said, Martin Kelly, I do think a 7 is a fair result. So now I'm going to move on to our second centre-back, Scott Dann, who I'm going to give an 8 overall. Now, in terms of the centre-back partnership, I do think both Dann and Kelly done relatively well in this game. But obviously I've given Dann an 8 as opposed to the 7, because he obviously impressed me even more. And when you consider, like I've said already, in comparison to Kelly and the rest of the team, obviously Scott Dann hadn't played since the last round, you know, against Tottenham. So of course he hasn't played in a few weeks or so. So coming into the side, you might expect him to be a little bit rusty, but once again came into the side and put in a very impressive performance. And, you know, when you consider the amount of pressure that Doncaster Rovers were putting on us in certain periods of the game, and certainly when they had all of the shots they had, when they were putting on that pressure, the fact that Scott Dann in particular actually stood strong was particularly at the beginning of the second half, where of course we're 2-0 ahead, and Doncaster really haven't got anything to lose, so they were just throwing everything at us. When they had that pressure in the second half, the fact that Dann in particular stood up and made himself counted, and essentially just was that rock for Palace at the back, was of course good to see. Now, the main thing I picked out about his performance, and this is certainly the main reason I was impressed with it, is just the fact that his task before the game, it must have been a tactical analysis or whatever Hodgson done before the game. He obviously knew Doncaster were going to put balls into the box, and essentially Dan's job was just to head the balls away from danger, and essentially that's what he did. You know, whenever any balls came into the box, Dan would be there to head them away. So whether that was just his job in terms of out of the centre-back partnership, the pairing, he had to be the one to head the ball away. Whatever it was, he was doing that on a lot of occasions. And even though you may say, you know, just hoofing the ball long or heading the ball long, it's not necessarily the greatest. And, you know, when you consider we have Tomkins and Sacco normally who play the ball out from the back. But when you've got someone like Doncaster who push so high, you need someone just to clear the danger. And certainly that's what Scott Dann did. Now, in terms of the threat that Doncaster had, I think just that calming presence that Scott Dann brought to the side, and especially the defence, that essentially just gave the team the assurance that whenever Doncaster did get into the box, they'd be able to deal with them. And of course, I suppose it gave the midfield a little bit more freedom, because they didn't have to worry about, you know, coming back and defending, because of course Dan and Kelly had it sorted. So I do think overall Scott Dann had a very good performance and certainly does deserve the 8 I've given him. So I'm going to move on now to our final defender, and that is the left back Patrick Vanana, who I'm going to give a 6 overall. Now, of course, he's struggled quite often over the last sort of few weeks or so, and I've talked about it in quite a lot of detail, saying he's been pretty average. He hasn't necessarily been bad, and certainly for me, I'm not going to give him too much criticism, because like I've said, he hasn't been terrible. Now, this was a game, once again, I've given him a 6, and it wasn't because he was totally average in the game. It's just the fact that other players in the end of it just sort of shone above someone like him, and he didn't necessarily have the chance to have any influence on the game. But I suppose in comparison to recent weeks, this was a step in the right direction, because it was a decent display. Yes, there was nothing spectacular, but performances like this where he gets a clean sheet, he's a threat going forward, things like this is what really should build his confidence going forth. Now, aside from his performance, because I thought that was okay, you know, defending was good. In terms of that physical battle with Doncaster players, that was good. In terms of getting a clean sheet, that was all good. Now, obviously, he could have had a penalty, and I'm not going to talk too much about this, but he's obviously made a run into the box once again, showing that attacking ability he's got. Run into the box, cut the ball back, and it clearly hit the hand of Downing. And of course, Mike Dean was in a perfect position to see it, but he obviously pointed for a corner instead. Now, for me, at the time, I thought that's a definite penalty. You could see he's sliding down, he's left his hand out, hooked it out for a corner. So, you know, first instinct is to go, yes, it's a penalty. But looking back at it, and some people may not agree with me, but I personally don't think it's a penalty. I think that the way he's fallen and obviously the direction he's going in terms of sliding off the pitch, I think that yes, it was, you could say it's a slightly unnatural position, because when you go down to the ground, you're sort of going to put your hands behind your back as opposed to in front of you and to the side. But nevertheless, I personally think, yeah, it could have been a penalty on another day, but personally for me, I don't really think it was a penalty. So if it had been a penalty, then we'll all be praising Varane, probably giving him a 7, because of course he would have won us that penalty. But overall, yes, he struggled in recent weeks, but this was a step in the right direction. A good performance both defensively and offensively, and hopefully he can use that to build on the games coming up. So I'm going to move on now to the midfield. I'm going to start with the captain, Luka Milivojević. He's another player in the team who, of course, much like Kelly, played in the game against West Ham last week, and certainly once again he played alright against West Ham, but coming into this game put in another sterling performance. That's why I'm going to give him the 8 overall. Now in terms of his midfield performance, I'll talk about that in a minute, but the goal in particular, and this is something that, looking back at the game, on Match of the Day in particular, they kept banging on about it, but in terms of the 2 goals we scored, he was involved in both of them. Now, in terms of the first one, obviously the run from Jeffrey Schlupp was fantastic, and you know, the weight of pass from Varane to Luka and Luka to Schlupp was obviously good. But that build-up play, in terms of the fact that Luka won back possession in the middle of the park, in his own half, we must say, then managed to get up, and then just seconds later, after getting the ball back, was able to obviously send Schlupp through, and Schlupp scored. So the build-up to the goal was absolutely fantastic, and the fact that he was the architect of that by winning the ball back, getting it to Varane, and getting up so quickly. You know, you could argue he could just stay on the floor and get up slowly, but the fact that he got up so quickly was alert enough to actually find Jeffrey Schlupp, who was making the run through, and of course he went through to score when 1-on-1 to obviously break the deadlock 8 minutes in, make it 1-0. So obviously not only was his midfield performance really good in terms of winning that midfield battle, having control of possession, but actually in terms of breaking up the play and getting the ball forward, he was absolutely outstanding with that. Now in terms of the goal itself, you know, looking back at the game, that's essentially what stopped Doncaster Rovers. You know, they started the game relatively well, and their high press was obviously causing Palace problems, but that goal essentially took the sting out of the game, stopped Doncaster in their moves, and even though they didn't start brightly, like I've said, it just looked like that we were the more likely to score, and that was probably down to the fact that we had just scored, took away their confidence, and obviously we therefore, you know, had that confidence of scoring and going ahead. So obviously the goal itself was good, but the build-up play was, you know, just as good, and he won't get an assist for that, I don't think. I don't know, looking back at it, you know, it's all 50-50, because obviously he, you know, made the tackle, got the ball up, got it to Varane, got it to him again. I'm not sure whether it took a deflection, don't think it did, but nevertheless, that's a great assist nonetheless. And like I've said already, the fact that, yes, the goal was good in terms of breaking the deadlock, but it all came from Luka, you know, breaking up the play in the middle. Now, in terms of his passing in the first half, you know, that's something that's obviously he utilises quite a lot, but in this game in particular, it was very crisp, very accurate, so of course that was good to see. And obviously, once again, Doncaster were looking to, you know, essentially looking to get back into the game, but we essentially punished them right at the death, you know, literally 2 minutes or 1 minute into injury time. Obviously, Lucas pinged a lovely ball once, received the ball from Townsend, pinged the ball into the box. Townsend once again made a run, headed it across goal, and of course Max Meyer was there to score when he got it squared by Townsend to make it 2-0. So not only was Luka involved in the first goal by breaking up the play and passing the ball forward and getting the assist for that goal, which I don't know why I was saying it wasn't an assist, because looking back at it, I'm pretty certain that's been given as an assist, but you can see sometimes the stat companies, you know, sometimes they're a bit silly like that by not giving assists and stuff like that. But the second goal was just as good in the fact that Townsend's made a good run down the right-hand side, put the ball, you know, right to the just outside the area. Lucas looked up, took one touch, pinged the ball up in the air, perfectly timed for Townsend. Townsend, of course, has got his head on it, headed it across the face of goal, and of course Meyer was there to obviously make it 2-0. So not only was he involved in our first goal, but also in the second goal. And if you're looking at both of them, you're going, actually, that tenacity for the first one in terms of making the tackle was great, but then the absolute quality of that pinged pass was also very good. So once again, showing the different skills he's got in the fact that he can tackle and get the ball forward, but also if he receives the ball, he can ping long passes as well. So overall, a good performance from Luka, and certainly something we want to see from him going forward. You know, we want to see him in more advanced positions, because if he can ping balls like that into the box, then we need to be getting him in them positions more often. But overall, Luka Milivojević here, I do think the 8 is a fair result. So moving on now to one of his midfield partners in Max Meyer, I'm going to give him a 7 overall. Now in terms of the early parts of the game, so you're looking at the first sort of 7 minutes or so where Doncaster were in the ascendancy, obviously Meyer in particular was one of these players who did seem to suffer because he didn't really see much of the ball. But once we got ahead and once we got a little bit more confidence and once we were containing Doncaster a lot better, Max Meyer seemed to come into his element, and obviously that's why I've given him the 7, because once we got ahead he seemed to, you know, control the game in the midfield, be that sort of be that pivot, let's say, in the midfield for us going forward, being that creator and being the provider. That's something which we know he can do, but it was nice to see him actually prove it to us once again how good he is in that area. Now one of the things I was impressed with is the fact that the sheer amount of forward runs he was making, and yes, quite a lot of them went unnoticed by his teammates, but the fact that he the fact that he kept making these runs, kept getting in the right areas, and then he finally got the reward by actually making a late run into the box, or making a run into the box, making sure he was onside, and then when Townsend put the ball across the area he was able to finish it. So the fact that he was persistent in the fact that throughout the whole of the first half he was making loads of forward runs but going unnoticed by the teammates, but then the one chance where he has a fantastic chance which is being provided by a teammate, the fact that he was in the right position really just goes to show how hard work does pay off, because you could literally 9 times out of 10 you go unnoticed, but if you're there when it counts, when there's a good chance and you can finish it, that shows how much of a class player you are and how persistent you are. So the fact that he was able to do that was of course good to see. Now of course that doubled our lead and gave us a better control of the game, and essentially essentially that's all I can really say about his performance, because obviously he got the goal, which of course was nice for him to get the reward, but in terms of the second half he continued making forward runs, continued to influence us from the centre of the field, and certainly in terms of his creativity, that's something which allowed us to break Doncaster down, because they were both good in offence and defence, so of course it was going to be pretty hard to break them down. So the fact that we had someone like Meyer who can of course try and break the team down by using his creativity was of course good to see. Now, like I said already, you know, right before half time was a great time to score, because I was literally looking back at the game thinking, yeah, I really wanted to get another goal before half time, and the fact that we got one, or I suppose before half time I was thinking, let's get a goal in the second half, 2-0, that should be fine, but the fact that we got one just before half time, just, you know, I think it was 1 minute into the added time, was of course good to see. And like I've said already, obviously Townsend, I'll talk about him in a minute, but his cushioned pass was great, but the fact that he was able to finish it, which he's one of the smallest players on the pitch, so to see him score a header is a bit weird, but like I've said, the fact that his persistence paid off was of course good to see. And in terms of the second half, he had another chance to make it 3-0, but of course his effort was blocked. But once again, the fact that he was making these runs into the box, loads of chances were falling to him, but of course when it mattered he was able to finish it, and then on the other occasion of course the effort was blocked. But once again, a very impressive performance from Max Meyer, and you know, it does really beg questions now when he puts in such a good performance like this, where he's involved offensively, where he gets a goal. Really, he should really be on the glimpses of the first team now, just because yes, he's played a few games this season in terms of starting, but he now needs to not be on the bench, because we really need to be utilising him for the full 90 minutes. And this game here showed that he can play a full 90 minutes, can play well throughout that 90 minutes, and of course he's got that quality. So that's something that Roy Hodgson really needs to ponder and consider, because this performance, for me at the least, showed the quality he has got. So I'm now going to move on to the final player in our midfield, and that is of course Jeffrey Schlupp, who I'm going to give an 8 overall. Now of course, once again, this was another player who played against West Ham, and I talked quite a lot in detail last week about who should start in midfield, you know, whether Jeffrey Schlupp should continue to start, whether Max Meyer should come in from MacArthur. And of course there was quite a lot of debate, especially after that West Ham game, as to what could be our best midfield going forward. Now I'm not going to comment too much on it now, because of course this game here, it was a cup game and we played our second string 11, but I do think the midfield we started in the game here, you know, in the fact that Jeffrey Schlupp and Meyer play slightly further forward in the midfield, and of course Luka sits deep, I do think that midfield three, or that partnership, seems to work really well for us. And certainly the game against Leicester coming up, we need to certainly try that, because I do think it worked very well here, and I do think going forward it could give us that balance we need in the midfield. Now whilst Guaita came on, and I do think as a midfield four, I do think, you know, Schlupp, Luka, Meyer and Guaita worked quite well as well, but because we want to play a 4-3-3, one of them's got to drop out. But it's nice to see we've now got options. Now I don't want to talk too much about it, because like I've said, it's a cup game, and essentially because you're playing your second string 11, your formation doesn't really matter. But I do think it begs the question that because that midfield three that started the game with Schlupp and Meyer and Luka performed so well, we need to certainly consider that going forward. Now, in terms of Jeffrey Schlupp, he's now had a nice run into the team, and even though people have criticised him, certainly at the beginning of the season, the fact that he's now got his inclusion in the team, he seems to be playing week in, week out, he's now showing his worth to the team. Now, of course, at the beginning of the season, he was only ever playing as a left back or as a left winger, but because now Roy Hodgson's put him in central midfield, he seems to be getting goals, helping us to get important goals. He's looking to help us play in the midfield by actually using his pace to drive forward. So whilst people are criticising him quite rightly at the beginning of the season, now he's playing in his new position, which really seems to suit him and also suits our formation, because it gives us the energy and pace in midfield that we may necessarily miss in other combinations. So the fact that he's bringing that to the side is of course good to see, but the main reason I was impressed with his performance is because of how well he played in midfield, because of that balance he gave us, but mainly because he broke the deadlock. And of course, it's really important to get the early goal, especially when you're playing against lower league opposition. They're going to make it really difficult for you. So of course, Jeffrey Schlupp, obviously I talked about Luka, but the run by Jeffrey Schlupp was of course great, running from his own half of the pitch into the penalty box. The fact that he hit it across the goalkeeper into the far corner, got it in the exactly right position, albeit it took a slight deflection, but nevertheless, the fact that he broke the deadlock by making that run from the midfield, driving forward, and the fact that he used his pace to get in behind, then put it far post away from the keeper, right, really accurately into that corner, was of course good to see. And in terms of his contribution this season, he's now scored 5 goals for us, which I think puts him sort of 3rd or 4th in our list of goal scorers this season. So even though he's been sort of a scapegoat this season, in the fact that some people have criticised him for his performances, as shown in this game here and shown in other games, he's now starting to show his worth on the team. Now he's playing in central midfield, we're seeing the best of him. And this game here against Doncaster was no different in the fact that he was running things in the midfield, using his pace, using his tenacity to get forward and back. And obviously the fact that he's able to make runs into the box by using his pace, and the fact that he's got a relatively good left foot was of course good to see. And I do think there was one occasion, we could talk all day about his goal, but one occasion where he literally ran from Doncaster's half of the pitch, ran back to his own and made a tackle essentially as a left back, because of course Vanana was in a different area of the pitch or couldn't quite get there. So you're looking at that going, yes, he's brilliant going forward, but actually because he's got that instinct of a defender, being a left back, he actually can go back and defend really well. So that's what you want from a midfielder. You want someone who can go back and defend and go forward. And with Jeffrey Schlupp, with the pace added in, you've got your perfect player to play in midfield. Now, in terms of dealing with Doncaster, I do think Jeffrey Schlupp, I've talked about that one example where he ran back and made that tackle, but there were loads of other times in the game where he made important interceptions to, of course, stop Doncaster's attack. So it wasn't necessarily about stopping the last man or stopping him because he's going to get a chance. It was all about stopping Doncaster before they could get anything going and before they could create anything. So because we've done that so effectively, it meant that for quite a lot of the game we were able to obviously snuff them out. To be honest, I've talked about this already, but I might as well put it out there again. This performance here and performances recently have showed us, the quality he's got, and it does beg the question, and he's really making a good case for himself as to why he should be on that left-hand side of a midfield 3. Now, like I've said already, don't want to go into too much detail about it now, but I do think the midfield that started this game here, yes, you could say it was against a lower league opposition, but Doncaster played well, so you've got to look at it and go, that midfield 3 worked really well, and we've got to play against Leicester, because Leicester have got pace in their attack. So if you've got someone like Luka in there, who obviously is the captain, so he would always start, but if you've got someone like him who can deal with the threat that Leicester have, and then add in someone like Jeffrey Schlupp who can obviously help out by using his pace, but can also go forward and break Leicester down, and you've got someone like Meyer as well who has that creativity and also the ability to go back. So if we play that against Leicester and they play as well as they did against Doncaster, that's going to give us a really nice balance in the game against Leicester coming up. But of course I'll leave that for you guys to debate, who should start on that left hand side of the midfield in particular. But once again, Jeffrey Schlupp showing his worth to the team in what was a good performance. So we're going to move on now to the first of our front 3, and that is Andros Townsend, who I'm going to give a 7 overall. Now once again, much like quite a lot of players in the side, put in a very good performance, and whilst he didn't necessarily get a goal or didn't have as much impact as he would have liked to, I still do think he had a very good game. And one of the main reasons why he wasn't necessarily as good as he has been recently is just because of how well Doncaster did. Now, especially in the early ages, I think that's most appropriate in the fact that he struggled, and that's just because Doncaster were playing quite well, basically dominating the midfield or dominating the opening period, and it took us to actually scoring the goal to get that sort of foothold back in the game. So Townsend was one of these players in particular, much like Meyer, who in the opening stages was finding it quite tough because of how well Doncaster were playing. But as soon as we got that goal, he got back into his stride, and because Doncaster play quite an attractive attacking style of football, left a few spaces in behind, and that's certainly what Townsend did down that right hand side. Whenever he got the ball, he was looking to get past players, and if he couldn't do that, he was looking for your 1-2s with people like Meyer and Joe Ward. So the fact that he was looking to do whatever he could to get past that Doncaster backline was of course really good to see. And it was good to see that even though he started the game, let's say he was quite anonymous in the start of the game, the fact that he was able to come above that, rise above that, and continue and improve as the game went on was of course good to see. Now in terms of assists, he's got, well, before the game he had 3, and obviously he made it 4 assists for the season with of course the second goal that Palace scored. Now I've already talked about Luka, that fantastic ball, looped ball he put into the box, and the fact that Townsend headed it. But the headering and the timing of his run is the thing that's just as impressive as that ball from Luka, because if Townsend isn't that intelligent, he'd probably be caught offside. So the fact that he timed it right, so he was onside, then managed to head the ball at just the right time, with the right, or at the right angle as well, to get it directly to Max Meyer was of course good to see. So not only was it nice to see him actually get rewarded for some of his good attacking play with the fact that he got an assist, but also it was nice to see that intelligent play from him in the fact that he was able to stay onside, then run forward, header it at the right angle, and obviously get the really good assist. And as you can see by the photos after the game, both him and Max Meyer were obviously quite delighted in the fact that they linked up really well for that goal. And Max Meyer in particular is a player who I've said quite a lot this season he worked really well with Wilfried Zaha, and I do think as a partnership on the field, I think that Meyer and Wilf do really well together. But the fact that in the absence of Wilf, Townsend was able to build that partnership with Meyer, especially for the goal. That's the most evident way you can see it. That was of course good to see. And in terms of everything Palace did going forward, in terms of our attacking play, Townsend was at the heart of it, always looking to get involved, and that's the thing that impressed me and why I've given him a 7, because at the beginning of the game he was fairly quiet, but the fact that he begun to get his stride, and in terms of by the end of the game he was involved in everything we did going forward. He was involved in all of that, but also on the break as well, trying to break down Doncaster, he was good at that as well. And on another day he probably could have had another assist, because there were multiple chances as well where he was creating chances for his teammates. So once again here, Andros Townsend, yes, he started the game quite slowly, but once we got into it and once we got a foothold in the game, he found it really I wouldn't say easy, but he found it easier, let's say, to actually have a go at Doncaster and use that pace and that trickery he's got to actually get past them. And one of the reasons for that is because of the space they left behind. And of course, it was nice to see his attacking play rewarded in the fact that he got his 4th assist of the season from that Meyer goal. And like I said already, on another day he probably could have had another assist. So now I'm going to move on to the second player in our front 3, and that was the striker Michy Batshuayi, who I'm going to give a 5 overall. Now, much like quite a lot of players, early on in the game, I do think Batshuayi was quite quiet, and certainly for the first 30 minutes, as opposed to sort of the first 10 minutes or so for players like Townsend and Meyer. Obviously, Batshuayi was quite quiet for the first half an hour or so, and in terms of chances in the game, he didn't really have any chances of note in that period of time. Now, obviously, in the 32nd minute, he obviously found himself unmarked at a corner, but he wasn't obviously able to test the goalkeeper. So, whilst in the first 30 minutes or so, he had no chances, very quiet, not really involved, then all of a sudden he gets a chance, and of course, even though he was unmarked at a corner, he wasn't really able to test the goalkeeper. So you could argue he could do better there, but when you consider he's just come off the back of half an hour of not really doing anything, when a chance like that does come to him, you'd expect him to do a lot better than it and actually test the goalkeeper. But of course, on that occasion, he wasn't able to do so. So in terms of the 5 I've given him, one of the factors and one of the reasons for that is just because, yes, he was quite early on in the game, and that could just be because he wasn't necessarily getting into it. But even if that was the case, when you have such a good chance like that, when you're unmarked inside the box, you obviously got to try and do a little bit better. Now, I'm not going to put too much blame on him, because sometimes it's difficult in them positions, but nevertheless, a chance that went begging, and arguably maybe should have done better. Now, obviously, after half time, things for him didn't necessarily improve much better, and I think if you're looking at his first half, you may be looking at a 5. If you're looking at his second half, you may be a 6 overall. So I do think the 5 overall is a fair result. And obviously, the reason I've given him a 5 is just because he failed to improve much after the break. Now, I say much because there were certain aspects of his game where he was looking to get involved more, so that was good. But on the whole, and the fact that he combined his performance with the fact that he fluffed yet another chance was of course disappointing. Now, that chance I'm referring to is one where we're playing the ball around, we've got the ball to him, he's literally, through on goal, fantastic chance to actually open his account for Palace. Essentially one-on-one with the goalkeeper, he's got through, he's taken his first touch, but because that first touch was so heavy, the ball's just gone too far ahead of him, and as he's tried to get his second touch, obviously the goalkeeper's come rushing through on goal and obviously put it out for a corner. So whilst the fact that he got into that position was obviously good, the first touch and obviously subsequently the second touch where he tried to get it under the goalkeeper, of course the goalkeeper dived, that was of course disappointing. Now, we've seen him score goals from that position, so you'd probably expect him to do better, and nine times out of 10 you'll probably expect a player to touch that first time, kill the ball dead and have a shot. But unluckily for us, as the ball was going forward, which of course the build-up play was good, as the ball was going forward he took the heavy touch and of course fluffed what was a fantastic opportunity to go through on goal. And arguably if he had taken his first touch properly and killed the ball dead, or put the ball not as far forward in front of him as he did with his terrible first touch, which he did do, maybe he could have scored from that chance. Now, obviously, in terms of the game itself, it was his full debut for Palace. Obviously, he's only played 2 games off the bench, and obviously, it didn't really go as he would have hoped. You would have hoped to, get off the mark and score a goal for Palace. But like I've said, he didn't really have too many chances, mainly because he wasn't really given the service, mainly because we were just playing with people like Jeffrey Schlupp and Luka actually getting the ball down the middle. So whether it was the fact that he didn't really have the service, or the fact that because he missed that chance in the first half and then subsequently missing that one in the second half, maybe things were just not going for him on the day. And obviously, just to top it off, Christian Benteke came on for him with about 15 minutes remaining, and of course I go on to talk about what he did later on. Now, once again, I'm going to give him a 5 overall because I do think he was fairly quiet in the game and slightly anonymous in the game, not because he didn't have that many chances, because the 2 chances in particular he obviously put one of them wide, or I say put it wide, it went out for a corner because the goalkeeper made the save, and the other one he didn't really test him. So whilst he was fairly quiet, when he did get chances he obviously wasn't able to finish them, one of them not on target and the other one obviously taking that poor first touch. So overall, slightly disappointing performance from him, but having seen how well he's performed previously and certainly in the last 2 games prior to Doncaster, I do think there are better things to come from him going forward. And if we can just get a little bit more service to him, then I think his performance is going to improve tenfold, because one of the reasons why I think he didn't play well against Doncaster was because of his lack of service. Not complete lack of service, but lack of quality service, let's say, on the whole. So if we can improve that against Leicester, if he does start, then of course that'd be a real good positive. So I'm going to move on to the final player, and whilst Jordan Ayew played quite a lot of the season as a striker, this game here he was playing on the left of our front 3, and much like Batshuayi, it was a bit of a disappointing performance from him. That's why I'm going to give him a 5 overall. Now, like I've said already, because we were playing the 4-3-3 and because Batshuayi obviously is a striker, we played him up top and obviously moved Jordan Ayew, I personally would say, to his more natural position on the left hand side, and certainly it's a position where I would have liked to see him play, and the fact that Hodgson went with it I was quite impressed with, because I think that Jordan Ayew, yes, he's alright up top, but he'll be better on the left. And I was quite disappointed because he didn't live up to that sort of hope or that expectation I had from him playing better in that position. Now, much like Batshuayi, he obviously wasted a very good opportunity midway through that first half, and it was so good from him in terms of his build-up play, the fact that he created loads of space for himself, but then he didn't finish that really good opportunity was of course the thing that was disappointing. So was Batshuayi, it was his poor first touch which of course saw him miss what was a fantastic opportunity. In Jordan Ayew's perspective, it was one where he'd done all the right things other than the fact that he scored. So he done well to create the space for himself, but of course didn't necessarily have that end product to finish the chance off. Now obviously in terms of that chance in particular, you could argue that he obviously had Batshuayi, Townsend, Meyer all screaming for the ball to be obviously whipped back into him, but of course he obviously opted for the shot, which of course the goalkeeper saved. So you could argue that when you're at a tight angle like that, you've got to try your luck, because as we saw with Wilf against West Ham, sometimes shots from that angle can go in. But when you consider you've got people like Townsend and Meyer who are in the area in good positions, and you can literally just cross the ball to them, maybe that could have been a better option. But like I've said already, it's nice to see him having that confidence to actually have shots from there. But then on that occasion, yes, I know the box was full of Doncaster players, but maybe he should at least try to just whip a ball in, across the ground, maybe for someone like Townsend or Meyer to score. But I suppose the only good thing to come out of his performance, and this is something he always does, the fact that he's always running his socks off, always doing his job for the team, was of course good to see. But the reason he was taken off just before the hour mark really was really down to just the lack of impact he had on the game, because whilst he was running channels, using his pace down that left hand side, looking to carry the ball forward, and of course that chance he had in particular, he was very good at creating space for himself. Yes, that was the case, but he didn't really have that telling impact or that telling end product on the game, and that's obviously overall why I was disappointed with his performance. So much like Batshuayi, not terrible performance, but certainly one that he could have done better with if, of course, he had the end product, and if he had the end product which to match how much effort he puts into his game, then he'd be a fantastic player for us. But because he has all the effort, but he sometimes lacks that quality, that's something that really does let him down. Now, in terms of the 3 substitutions we made in the game, obviously Cheku Kuyate, I'm going to give him a 6 because I do think when he came on, he done relatively well. Christian Benteke only came on for about 50 minutes or so, came on for Batshuayi, and that was sort of a like-for-like swap. Didn't really have too much input in the game, going to give him a 5. And of course, James McArthur came on for Townsend, essentially just to sort of stiffen up the midfield, help us see out the game, so I'm going to give him no rating. Now, just going back to Cheku Kuyate, obviously I've given him a 6. Obviously, he's had an ankle problem, so he's missed the last sort of few games or so. So, of course, it was nice to see him come back into the team, because prior to him getting injured, he'd been one of our best players. So the reason he was brought on was just to shore out the game, shore up our midfield, and basically just give us that solid defensive solidity, just to help us see out the game. And essentially, that's what he done. He brought to the team, a little bit more presence in the midfield, and that helped us to see out the game. And one of the things in particular which I picked out from his performance is just that good covering he had of Vanana on the left hand side. So whilst looking back at his performances, you'd say normally he plays sort of on the right hand side of midfield, but on this occasion here he was playing on the left, and of course he provided good cover to Vanana. So in terms of his influence on the pitch, yes, he obviously came on, he didn't necessarily completely change the game, but his job was of course not to change the game, but was to see it out. And the fact that he was helping Vanana out, and obviously eventually helped us to go on and see the game, was of course good to see. Now, in terms of his midfield performance, he was very good and very effective at actually shutting down Doncaster, restricting their chances. And once again, goes back to the point, he wasn't brought on to completely change the game, he was brought on to help us see it out, and that's exactly what he did. And certainly in the second half, where Doncaster had nothing to lose, when they were building up a bit of momentum, obviously we brought on Cheku Kuyate just to sort of break that up. Now, in terms of Benteke and McArthur, I've given Benteke a 5 mainly because he came on for Batshuayi with about 15 minutes remaining. Didn't really have too much to do, but wasn't really the greatest cameo because there was a few chances where he could have done better with. And in terms of his hold-up play, that's something I've really talked about recently, because that was being fantastic in the games he's played recently. But this game, it was sort of him reverting back to his old self, where he failed to hold up the ball on a few occasions. And even if he's not going to score, I'd rather him hold up the ball and give it to someone else, and we didn't quite see that on this occasion. And of course, James McArthur, no rating for him because of course he was he was introduced quite late on for Townsend. Of course, once again, bring off an attacking player, bring on James McArthur just to sort of stiffen up the midfield and help us see the game out. Now, in terms of the game overall, just a small summary of it. I think this game, looking back at it, the game, I personally was quite worried about the game because because it was one of the last games on that Premier League weekend. I didn't want to be the team who had that banana slip and slipped up. So of course I was worried in that respect. But then, of course, lower league opposition, you're going to be less worried because you've got a so-called easier team. Now, I think that this game as a whole, and certainly the performance from both teams, wasn't really what people were expecting or wanted from the game too much. And I suppose that's a good thing, because in the way I look at it is that I was quite worried that we might potentially slip up because it's a lower league team who've been playing extremely well. I think in the last sort of 30 games they've only lost 3, so they're on a really good run of form. So the fact that I personally wasn't expecting us to completely run over them, but likewise, I wasn't really expecting, us to find it a little bit as difficult as we did. Obviously, we were fairly comfortable, but we obviously had to get that early goal to get that control of the game because they were playing well. So I do think overall, it wasn't necessarily what people were expecting, and that's obviously a good and bad thing. So, like I've said already, both teams played really well, and I do think the early goal for us really did help us because at that moment, early on in the game, Doncaster were really up for it, had that momentum building, but because we got that early goal, allowed us to get that foothold in the game. Now, one of the reasons why I suppose people are not too worried about the game and the fact that we let Doncaster play well, it's just because we didn't really have to get out of second gear. We obviously started the game obviously weathering the storm of Doncaster's pressure. Then we hit them on the counter-attack, score that early goal from Jeffrey Schlupp. Then we see out the rest of the half. And then literally just before half-time, we score that goal to make it 2-0. So I do think on the whole, it was a professional job nonetheless. So whilst you could talk about, we didn't have to get out of second gear, didn't really have to push to break down Doncaster. Yes, that could have been the case, but then also Doncaster was still good, so you've got to consider that. And I do think professional is the best word to describe our performance, because we went there, done what we had to do, and come away with the result we of course would have wanted. Now, of course, like I've said already, what we wanted to do was to obviously avoid banana slip. So the fact that we've done that, you've got to look at that as a positive. And the fact that we're now in the next round, that's once again a very good positive as well. Because, like I've said, we could have slipped up, we could have been knocked out of the cup. But because now we're into the next round, we've got Watford. So if we beat Watford, then that's another game at Wembley. So, of course, we're now getting closer and closer to the end target, which, of course, you're in a competition to win it. So, the fact that we avoided this banana slip, we've now got a favourable tie, or a favourable tie in the next round. It's not easy going away to Watford, but when you consider, we avoided Manchester City, we avoided Manchester United, so the fact that we avoided the big teams who are still in a competition really, I suppose, it gave us a reward for actually avoiding that banana slip and actually playing well against Doncaster. Now, for me overall, I thought I want to finish this section by just talking about Doncaster, because I would give them a lot of credit because I thought they played well. They seem to be a very tidy outfit, and I wish them all the luck in terms of trying to get promoted this season, because they played really well, a good sporting team, and I would expect them to get promotion this season, because what I saw in this game here is that yes, we had the quality to eventually see out the game and get the 2-0 win, but nevertheless I think Doncaster put a good account of themselves out a bit, and certainly I'll be keeping an eye on them to see whether they can get promoted this season. So now I'm going to move on to my Man of the Match award. But before I do that and give you my Man of the Match, I thought the biggest influence on the game, I'm now going to give you the 4 nominations I put forward for the award. Now, as you obviously heard in the player ratings, in the fact that it was a good performance, not only from Palace but of course from Doncaster. So of course, looking back at the game, it was pretty difficult to pick 4 players to put forward for the award, mainly because there was just good performances across the field. And in terms of our midfield in particular, they played really well in terms of weathering the storm. So there were quite a number of players who I could have picked from, and when you look at games recently where, it was not necessarily difficult to pick a 4, but it was obviously not the easiest task, in the fact that some of our performances haven't necessarily been the greatest, and there have been other ones where they've been so good. So we've had a right mixture of games recently where it's been quite difficult to pick one player in particular, but there's certainly 4 players to put on the shortlist. So it was nice once again to have a really difficult task in terms of narrowing it down to 4 players. It just goes to show how good the performances were across the field. Now, in terms of the 4 players I've gone with Scott Dann, Luka Milivojević, Max Meyer and Jeffrey Schlupp. So I've got a nice mixture there between your defence, your midfield in terms of the defensive side, and of course your offensive side of the midfield. Now, in terms of Scott Dann, I was just really impressed with how he defended throughout the game. When Doncaster were putting on lots of pressure on us, trying to get momentum in the game, the fact that Scott Dann stood strong, was able to stop everything they threw at them, or they threw at us, was of course good to see. And especially sort of at the beginning of the second half, where they had nothing to lose, they literally just came at us. After that second half began in particular, the fact that he stood strong, was able to see out the rest of the game, was of course good to see. And one thing in particular which I was really impressed with is that, I don't know whether it was tactical or whatever it was, he was obviously tasked with headering the ball, and anything aerial that came into the box, he had to deal with it. So the fact that whenever the ball came into the area, he was the one who got the ball away from danger. The fact that he'd done that, but also done it so well and so effectively, was of course good to see. And in terms of, because of how well he was doing that and how effective he was at doing that, essentially gave the whole team that assurance that we were able to cope, or the back 4 were able to cope with the threat that the League One side did pose. Now, in terms of my second player, Luka Milivojević, the captain, yet again a good performance from the Serbian. And in terms of his performance here, I could talk about the 2 goals, but actually aside from the 2 goals where he got the assists, you're looking back at it going, just his midfield performance as a whole, in terms of breaking up play, looking to get forward, essentially just frustrating the opposition. He done what he normally does really well, so that was of course nice to see. Now, moving back to the 2 assists that he got in the game, or one of them is a pre-assist because he was the guy who assisted Townsend, but nevertheless, the first goal, obviously in his own half, he's won the ball back off a player, got the 1-2 off Lallana, got up off his feet really quickly, and then threaded the ball down to Jeffrey Schlupp, who of course went up the other end and scored. So not only was he involved in general midfield play and general defensive play, but when he was doing that, as with Schlupp's goal, not only was he looking to get the ball back, but he looked to get the ball back and then played it forward, and of course we scored from the end of it. Now, once again, just before half-time, we obviously scored our second goal. Once again, it was all to do with Luka. You know, the ball came to him on the edge of the area, pinged a delightful ball, lovely timing on it, lovely weight on it, right to the head of Andrew Townsend. He, of course, headed it across goal, and of course, Meyer scored. So, not only was he involved in the first goal by actually breaking up play and getting the ball forward, but the second one, that delightful pinged pass he put into the box, was, of course, really impressive. Now, obviously, I could talk all day about his performance because, you know, I suppose both his offensive and defensive side of his game was really good, but I do think the main reason I put him forward for the award, and I think most people won't disagree with me, is just because of the sheer class he showed with them 2 goals in particular. Now, obviously my third player on the list was Max Meyer, and of course he got the goal, which of course was something he deserved to get from the game, but the sheer fact that he was making lots of forward runs, was very positive with his general sort of offensive play in the midfield, was of course the thing that was really impressive for me. And even though most of that good work went unnoticed by teammates, in the fact that he was looking to get forward, was always in good positions, but you know his teammates couldn't quite find him. Yes, that was the case, but on the one chance where his teammate did find him in Andrew Townsend, the fact that he was able to score really just goes to show that your hard work does pay off. And it was nice to see Meyer not only get the goal, but also get the goal considering how good he had been into the game coming up to that. And you know, aside from the goal he scored, he also had a number of other opportunities in that second half to maybe get a second. And you know, it just goes to show that if you allow someone like Meyer to actually express himself and actually, you know, get forward and actually be that creative figure, making late runs into the box, and the fact that he's got that intelligence to stay on side and make these runs is of course good to see. So I do think, you know, once again, obviously the positive impact he made going forward by making these runs forward was of course good to see. But when you score a goal like that, you know, you're the smallest player on the pitch, but then you score a goal from a header, once again doing what you've done throughout that first half by making these positive runs into the box, was of course good to see. Now, in terms of the final player, Jeffrey Schlupp, you know, he's obviously scored the goal which broke the deadlock in the game. Obviously, Luka, fantastic ball to play from him, but the fact that Jeffrey Schlupp in his own area had that pace to run the length of the field inside the box, had that physicality to essentially hold off the defender, then even though it took a deflection, he obviously had that ability to hit it on his left foot into the far post, or in off the far post. The fact that he had the pace, the power and the accuracy to get that in there was of course good to see. And you know, aside from the goal he scored, I do think his overall midfield performance was good in the fact that he was able to break up play, able to get forward, make positive runs. And like I've said already, I do think, I talked already about the midfield partnership, but I do think Meyer and Schlupp in particular were quite crucial to us getting something from this game, because I do think both of them doing defensive and offensive work was really effective, and certainly was one of the reasons why we played as well as we did in the game. And like I've said already, you know, he'd made a real claim for himself as to why he should be starting on the left hand side of our midfield, because that performance showed, you know, he got the goal, had that tenacity in midfield, used his pace effectively, so done everything you'd expect from a midfielder. Now obviously already, like I've said, there were a few players who missed out, and certainly I could have put a lot more players on this shortlist, but I've gone with obviously Scott Dan and Luka Milivojević, Meyer and Schlupp, obviously for a number of reasons. You know, you're looking at Dan because of his defensive work, you're looking at Luka because of how influential he was in terms of our 2 goals, and then you're looking at Meyer and Schlupp just because of how creative and how defensively good and sound they were in the midfield. So I do think overall all these players obviously do deserve credit, but of course I'm going to give the Man of the Match award to Luka Milivojević, who of course won the official Man of the Match award by which the club run, and I do think he does deserve it. You know, when you consider, yes, he won't get any reward, let's say, for that assist or the pre-assist that he obviously gave to Andrew Townsend, but the fact that he was involved in both our goals, both of them he was involved because of his good bit of play. You know, the first one breaking up the play and getting the ball forward, and obviously the second one with that pinged ball on the edge of the area. So the fact that he was not only involved in terms of our good midfield play, but the fact that he popped up when it mattered to obviously have a real say in the goals we scored was of course good to see. So like I said already, all 4 of these players obviously do deserve credit, as does the whole team, but obviously Luka Milivojević wins this week's Man of the Match award. So now you've heard my match report, player rankings and my Man of the Match. That concludes this week's podcast. Now I've got an interview with Roy Hodgson following the game.
Let's give us your thoughts on the game and having negotiated a potentially tricky hurdle.
Well, it was a very tough game. We were prepared for a tough game. We certainly knew that Doncaster Rovers were a good football team. We'd seen enough and done enough of our research to know that, and luckily I was able to really imprint that in the minds of the players, so there was never going to be any question of any complacency on our part. And in fact, they were every bit as good as I thought they might be, or would be, perhaps even slightly better. The pitch is a little bit of a factor which evens things out. I think they probably handled the fact the pitch was a bit hard and bumpy better even than we did. But I thought both teams tried to play good football. There were some good moves from both sides when we were able, and that's not just us, Doncaster too, able to get the ball down and under some control. So in the end, we're delighted to have come through on the right side and going to the quarter-finals. And I was just saying to Grant now in the room, I think he should be really very proud of his team, and I don't think they could have done any more to win this game than they tried to than they did.
How important was that early goal for you?
Yeah, it was a wonderful goal as well, wasn't it? You know, you don't see many goals where people start off in their own half and run the whole half of the field and hold off challenges and shrug off challenges and then strike it in like he did. It was an excellent goal. The second goal was a good goal too, and that came at a very good moment just before half time. I'd have been happy to go in 1-0, let alone 2-0 up. But of course it did give us that cushion in the second half. We were able to make one or two changes which shored us up a little bit better, and as the game wore on, it was always going to be a bit more of desperation stuff from Doncaster than they'd shown up to that point where they were really trying to work their way through us. But we're happy to be through. I think our fans deserve great credit today. I thought that their support was really quite exceptional. You know, playing away here with 15,000 people in the stadium, the bulk of whom support Doncaster Rovers, for them to be able to match the noise levels like they did for such long periods of time, they deserve a great pat on the back, and I think they helped pull us through.
You mentioned the lack of complacency from your side, that there were no complacency at all, and how professional they were in the way they approached the game.
Yep, they were. They worked very, very hard. Even the players who didn't have the best of games worked very, very hard to make certain that we gave nothing away. But I'm fortunate that I've come to a club where it's par for the course that players are like that. You know, we obviously work at it, but we get a great response from this group of players, and I think that it would have been very easy for a team to come here today and meet this Doncaster Rovers without perhaps that gutsy, determined and focused approach that we had, and could have quite easily slipped up because Doncaster would have been good enough to beat them.
Yeah, well, how do you view this year's competition? Because there's a lot of big clubs have gone out, one will go out tomorrow night. I mean, there's a real opportunity for you.
Yeah, but the fact is, you know, we're a team that's between the middle and the bottom of the table, and the teams that have gone through are teams around us, and the bottom line this competition is that sooner or later you're going to meet Man City or one of Man United and Chelsea. So it's just a question of when that happens, because then you're going to have a real tough tie on your hands. The important thing, I think, is to take each game as it comes, and what was important for me is we've had a home game against a team in your league in the first one, and that really was a bit of a non-event. Grimsby were fantastic. They put up an incredible fight, but they only had 10 men, so it was very much an attack v defence game. But then we had Tottenham Hotspur and now Doncaster, so it's not been easy, and the next one won't be easy either. But we're happy just to be in the draw, and our priority and our focus still remains the same, that, you know, we would like to do well in the Cup, but we'd like even more to stay in the Premier League. So that always remains the priority, as seen by today when we were able to rest one or two players.
Well, you've been in the game a long time, but from a personal level, you get excited about the FA Cup. You are 2 matches from Wembley, from an FA Cup final. You've never been there.
No, that's true. I might not get there again. Yes, I don't know. I think I'm nervous, apprehensive and anxious before every game we play. I don't care whether it's a 5th round FA Cup tie against Doncaster Rovers or an away game at Man City or Old Trafford. I don't vary my approach or my feelings. We do our level best to work hard in the training sessions to make certain the players are ready for the game that's going to be played, that they're ready tactically and know exactly what we want from them tactically. And I don't think you can do much more than that. And then when the referee blows the whistle, to some extent you just sit back and hope that the work that you and the players have put in will be good enough, and your decision making is really just restricted to the substitutions that you think might be necessary to help change the game. And luckily I thought the substitutions we made today and the people we had available to make those substitutions helped us a great deal.
Roy, just one from me quickly. When Hennessey came back into the side today, I know he's going to contest his FA charge, but was it a difficult decision for you in any way whether to bring him back in, given the nature of the charge?
No. The charge is what it is. We've spoken about that at great length, and we are both hoping and are confident that charge will not lead to any particular sanctions. We believe he's totally innocent of any charge that's been made, although we do understand in this current climate that the FA are duty bound to research everything, but I had no doubts about that. He deserves to play. He was very, very good today, as has Guaita been in the games leading up to this, but he's played in all of the cup matches so far, and if we whatever the draw will be in the next game, I'm expecting him probably to play in the next one too.
Okay. Well, last one.
Expected you since the decision from the FA on Wilkes' suspension. Did you feel that was a harsh finding for him to miss a game for that?
It depends. I think it's harsh in terms of a footballing viewpoint, and I made this point to the commission when I spoke to them. I think that getting banned for 2 games for the crime that he sort of committed, i.e. being provoked and reacting to that provocation and then feeling the injustice and clapping the referee, technically it's totally wrong. You're not allowed to do those things. I still feel that a 2-match ban for him, it's a tough punishment, but I understand also the FA from a technical point of view are entitled, if you like, to ask for that extra match. We were hoping and even believing that we had a good case for the appeal, and I think the appeal lasted quite a long time, so it was obviously taken very seriously, but in the end they decided to uphold the sanction, and we just had to accept that.
Did you make your case about the protection that he possibly could get from referees during that process?
Oh, well, there's all sorts of things said in the process, and I don't want to go into that here now, but we got a fair hearing. I thought that the people were sympathetic. They pursued the charge from their viewpoint, which was very much a referee and technical viewpoint. Mine was, I suppose, the football one. Yes, it was wrong. He's apologised. He shouldn't have done it, but does he really deserve to miss 2 matches? But my viewpoint failed.
So there you have it. Now you've heard what Roy Hodgson had to say after the game. That concludes this week's podcast for the game against Doncaster Rovers. But make sure to come back next week for a post-match review of the game against Leicester. So thanks for listening, and remember to up the Palace.